There is a high probability that Bitcoin will continue to go up until the end of 2027. And that's exactly what I'm breaking down for you in today's video. Because from the macro cycles perspective, the probability of such event is quite high. On top of that, we are going to check some key crypto charts, such as Ethereum, XRP, Solana, and ZCash. Crucial price setups, and the most relevant market news you need to stay ahead. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and check out some of my recent uploads. Now let's jump straight into the core of today's content. So from our last video, we were talking about a reversal of the crypto market cap. The weekly cycle bottom has already been confirmed, and I expect the crypto market in general to rise back up, even though slowly. We also have the confirmation of the DSS that just crossed, and the RSI is already showing signs of a reversal. And that's exactly why there is a high probability of Bitcoin to continue to rise until the end of 2026, beginning of 2027. So since my previous video, I decided to take a deep dive into the charts again, and I identified a quite interesting pattern. According to the cycle theory, we have to be right translated on the 4-year cycle. This means that the top could happen anywhere between now up until the first quarter of 2027. And right now we have 3 scenarios. The first 2 I already laid down on my previous videos, respecting the weekly cycle perspective. The first 2 scenarios would top right here, before the middle of the year in 2026, respecting the left translation on the weekly cycle failure. However, since the bigger cycle dictates the rule, we can still have right translated weekly cycles until the first quarter of 2027, and that will still be okay from the cycle strategy perspective. So zooming in a little bit more, I can't consider the blue forecast to be already validated. Even if we start to reverse right now, it means that the blue one has been confirmed. In order for the orange forecast to happen, we need to see much more good news coming up, which will affect the market in an extremely positive manner. However, if we do not have big structural changes, I think that the pink scenario, it is going to be quite possible. And here's the most piece of data that I'm closely watching. It is the value trend line on the weekly cycle perspective. If we do not cross down this trend line, it means that we are pretty okay to continue to go bullish until further notice. This means that the biggest enemies for a last significant rise on Bitcoin price is going to be adoption. If we start to get blocked on adoption and we need to retreat, the blue scenario is quite possible. But in order to see the orange and the pink ones, we need to see crypto adoption by the government to start to rise back. And that's exactly what makes me closely watch our long position on Bitcoin right now and track the daily cycles. Daily cycles are much more reactive, and they might start to give hints about the bigger cycles. Right now, we are still quite good on our long position. And I see many people talking about this pullback right here and freaking out. But from our previous videos, we were already ready for such pullback. I told in my previous videos that we are entering a daily cycle window and we should expect some pullback during this time. But again, we cannot say for sure how much of a pullback we are going to get. But a pullback nevertheless, in which the value trend line on the daily cycle is respected, means that everything is still according to plan. Even if we get a further pullback up until that and rise back up, slowly crawling to the upside, it is still fine. In order to know how much aggressive the price of Bitcoin will behave from now on, we have to see how gold will price over the next following days and weeks. If gold continues to rise up, it means that the price of Bitcoin will still continue to go slowly. But as soon as we get an aggressive pull to the downside, we can expect a major price rise. And the upcoming economic events that might influence the price of Bitcoin right now is rate cuts. As you can see, rate cuts are following precisely the 2-year government yield. Although in the short term we are touching this trend line, if we can still hold back down, it means that rate cuts will continue to drop. However, the 10-year yield rose aggressively last week. These dotted lines right here mean the last time that the Fed cut rates. And in order for the Fed to cut rates again at the end of January, we have to see the 10-year bond yields to go back down sooner than later. And there are two pieces of data that will deeply impact how likely it is the 10-year bond yield to go down. The first one is through inflation. We have to see inflation to continue to go down in order to give more support for the Fed to cut rates. In the same way, the labor market has to continue to get worse. By the end of this week, we are going to see the jobless claims, and it has to be worse. So a deteriorating labor market alongside with a decrease in inflation, it is going to reprice the probability of a rate cut for at least 25 basis points. But remember, like I always say it on my videos, just because it is a rate cut, it does not mean it is going to be bullish. Like I said before, the real rate of inflation must go below zero, and we are still a long way until then. So even though we might get rate cuts and we might get some price rises until then, we will only have an aggressive move once the real rates get below zero. In the meantime, liquidity is still key in order to keep the price going up. And we can track that from the ETF inflow. We already see some more inflow of ETFs on Bitcoin, and that of course will continue to drive the price higher. It has to continue to get more and more inflow like we had back in April. Now, some really important piece of data that I want to talk about is the ETF cost basis. I was analyzing the charts and I found out that since the beginning of the ETF launch, the ETF net inflow is respecting the cost basis as a strong support region. This means that the ETFs will do everything they can in order to keep the price of Bitcoin above this line. Of course, this is not always the case, and the ETFs started quite recently. But this is going to give us a good perspective on the liquidity behavior from big players like ETFs. From what we saw at the end of 2025, the price of Bitcoin slightly touched the ETF cost basis, and I believe that will continue to go up. Now, when we have a look at the liquidation point, we have quite big clusters on the upside, and that's exactly why I noticed this setup on the 4-hour time frame. We had this break of structure right here at around the 95,000 level, and after that the price is now back down at around the 92. I believe the price can have some liquidity sweeps as further down as the 90 level, getting liquidity up until the 89,000. In the same way, Fear and Greed Index is getting back down into the fear level. Take into account that we are already on a daily cycle window, I do expect the price to crawl back down up until the value trend line of the daily cycle before rising back up, which is a similar situation for Ethereum. Ethereum is still respecting the weekly cycle trend line. Getting to the daily cycle window, it means that it can drop even further compared to Bitcoin, but still, as long as it holds this support line, it is still everything according to plan, which is not the case for XRP. I still need to see XRP to break out the 2.43 level before considering a bullish scenario. Take into account that right now it is pricing at the daily and weekly cycle window. So a bearish perspective on XRP is quite valid. I would expect the price to continue further down, but we would need to see a lot of momentum to break this value trend line on the daily cycle window as well as this resistance level. And just like XRP, Solana is following a similar pattern. It is trading on this region right here, but I need to see a breakout at the 146.5 before to consider to be bullish. Also take into account that Solana is pricing towards a daily cycle window, so we can expect further price to be down for Solana. ZCash, on the other hand, is just following our short position. Still trading at the valid daily cycle trend line, I expect the price to continue to go to this direction, even maybe testing the trend line. But nevertheless, the scenario for ZCash is overall quite bearish. Tell me what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you on the next video.